Eden 51, table for two, window seat, she'll love it. A single message, 12 words. And just like that, 17 years of marriage started unraveling. My name is Vivian Royce. I'm 41 years old, a senior lecturer at the Manhattan School of Leadership. My husband, Cole Maddox, is a partner at a top-tier corporate law firm. From the outside, we were solid two professionals, a condo overlooking the East River holiday cards sent out every year with our dog Oliver in a bow tie. A good life, people said. But people don't see late nights where silence fills the kitchen. They don't see the text that flashes on a phone left, charging too carelessly. They don't hear the way your name stops sounding like love and starts feeling like obligation. It was a Tuesday evening. Cole was in the shower, humming softly, the sound distorted by steam. I was folding laundry at the foot of our bed routine. Forgettable, the kind of moment no one ever expects to change their life. His phone lit up with a soft chime. I glanced, expecting a calendar ping or news update. Instead, I saw it. Eden 51. Table for two. Window seat. She'll love it. I stared at it for a full 10 seconds, heart thudding slow and hard, like someone knocking on the inside of my ribs. Eden 51 wasn't just any restaurant. It was our someday place. The place we said we'd go when work slowed down, when things settled, when we finally made time. We never did. Cole canceled our 10th anniversary reservation there, claiming he had to fly out for a client emergency. But here it was, rebooked, for someone who was not me. With a window seat, my favorite. The water in the bathroom kept running, fogging the mirror. I reached for the phone like it wasn't even mine, the code still unchanged. 4 digits, our wedding date. The irony punched me in the chest. The screen unlocked instantly. What I found inside wasn't just a betrayal. It was a secret life. Photos, messages, inside jokes. A woman named Tessa, blonde. Works in corporate communications. Her name was everywhere, text bubbles, calendar invites. Even saved selfies from a 2-day trip to Montauk. Cole looked younger in those pictures. Looser. As if the life he built with me was just his day job. And the smile I once knew belonged to someone else now. The scent of his body wash drifted from the bathroom. I could hear the water stop. I could hear him drying off. I could hear my own breath grow shallow and sharp. And yet I didn't throw the phone. I didn't scream. I placed it back, screen down precisely where it had buzzed. He stepped out a moment later. "Have you seen my navy tie, top drawer?" I answered. My voice was calm. My hands trembled behind my back. That night I lay beside a man who no longer saw me, and I stayed still, eyes open, muscles clenched, counting the seconds between his breaths. You ever have a moment like that when the truth doesn't just hurt? It rewrites the entire story you thought you were living. If you were in my shoes, what would you do? Tell me in the comments, and if you believe in dignity after betrayal, subscribe to this channel. Every story here is a truth someone chose to reclaim. They say most love stories begin with sparks. Mine began with certainty. Cole Maddox walked into my life when we were both 23. He was a second-year law student at Columbia. I had just started teaching assistant work. While finishing my master's in business leadership, we met at a cross-department networking mixer, one of those painfully curated events where everyone carries a drink and a hidden agenda. Except Cole. He didn't try to impress me. He listened, asked questions, laughed with his whole face. I remember thinking, this is someone who sees people. We dated for 2 years, married by 25. Our wedding was small but beautiful, a rooftop terrace in Chelsea's soft jazz, handwritten vows. He slipped the ring onto my finger during a spring drizzle and whispered, "I will never lose my way back to you." 17 years later, those words still echoed. Only now they stung. In the early years, our life was fast-paced but full of meaning. Morning coffees rushed but shared text messages midday just to say thinking of you. I used to leave him notes in his briefcase. He'd tuck a protein bar into my laptop bag with a scribbled "Don't skip lunch." Little things, nothing grand but steady warm. Then came the job offers, the long hours, the promotions, the speaking events. Slowly, the man who once looked for excuses to come home early began finding reasons to stay out late. I excused it all. He's building something for us, I told myself. Stress does that to people. But the signs had been there, bright, flashing, and yet somehow unseen. His clothes smelled different, cleaner, sharper, not the scent of home, but of a luxury cologne I'd never bought him. His shirts were crisper than the ones I ironed. He started washing his car himself even though he hated it. A hairbrush I didn't recognize once slipped from his overnight bag. Once I asked lightly, "New fragrance." He blinked, then smiled. "Oh yeah, someone at the office gave it to me as a birthday joke. You like it?" I nodded. Lied. "It's interesting." But in truth, I couldn't place what unsettled me more, his new scent, or the fact that he never asked me if I minded it. We began to sleep farther apart. Not in separate beds, but emotionally. Cole still made the bed, still washed dishes on Sundays, but his eyes stopped meeting mine in the mornings. His voice grew efficient, practical. I became the CFO of our home, handling groceries, maintenance bills, all while keeping my lectures running and smiling in department meetings. And yet I never stopped defending him. To friends, to my sister, to myself. When he missed my department keynote to attend a partner retreat in Chicago, I said, "He sent flowers. He cares." When he forgot our anniversary for the first time in 14 years, I told myself, he's under pressure. It happens. But the truth, I was afraid to see what I already knew, because admitting the crack meant acknowledging the collapse. And sometimes pretending is easier than rebuilding. Until Eden 51. That name hadn't come up in years. It was the place we swore we'd dine at after making partner, the one we'd bookmarked on our joint vision board like it was a someday prize for surviving New York. When he canceled our 10th anniversary reservation, claiming he had to fly to Palo Alto for urgent client arbitration, I had believed him. I even packed his suitcase. And now I was looking at the same reservation, same restaurant, same window seat request. But not for me, it was for her. Tessa Lang. I remembered the name from an email signature I'd seen in passing. She worked in internal communications, blonde, younger, with a confident smile. I had never met her, but something in me recoiled at how easily she slid into the parts of Cole's life where I used to belong. My mind reeled. How long had this been going on? What was real anymore that night? I poured myself a glass of wine and sat at the kitchen table alone, the lights low. The city glowed outside, soft and different. Cole was asleep upstairs, probably dreaming of a red dress that wasn't mine. I stared at the stem of the glass, the condensation pooling at its base. I didn't cry. Not yet. I just sat. Still. Breathing. I wasn't ready to explode. I was preparing to decide. There's a moment in every woman's life after the betrayal, before the reaction, when silence is not surrender, but strategy. Mine came in the shape of a dinner reservation, and it would be his undoing. Wednesday morning arrived like any other. The sky outside was bruised with gray, the streets below still damp from the rain the night before. Cole had already left for his supposed breakfast meeting when I padded into the kitchen barefoot, the cold tiles biting at my feet. But unlike other mornings, I didn't reach for coffee. I reached for clarity. I sat down at the counter, opened my laptop, and signed into Cole's work calendar. I knew the password, of course I did. I had typed it for him a dozen times when he forgot it during tax season or when syncing his accounts. Cole never thought he needed to hide anything from me. Not because he trusted me, but because he believed I would never look. His arrogance was my opening. There it was, Friday, 7:30 p.m., Eden 51. Under the subject line, L&R client dinner, private. But this wasn't client-related. There was a note attached, window seat confirmed. Bottle of Chateauneuf du Pape pre-ordered. Dress code, smart casual. She likes the corner view. My stomach clenched. The level of planning, the familiarity, the ease. And just below it, an email thread with a name that now burned in my mind, Tessa Lang. She worked in communications at his firm. Her profile was easy to find, sleek headshot, bold red blazer, confident eyes. A quick search revealed she was 32, joined the firm 2 years ago, married. Married. That's when the idea struck me. If Cole wanted a night to remember with another man's wife, perhaps it was time that man received an invitation too. I began researching. Tessa's social profiles were curated but not cautious. A few scrolls in, and I saw a post from 3 months ago. Proud of Julian for completing the redesign at Yorktown Plaza. Can't wait to see it come to life. Tagged Julian Lang. Julian's page was more restrained. A firm website. Professional headshots. Mentions in several architectural magazines. He was known for sustainable minimalist commercial design, Brooklyn-based, sharp features, a quiet warmth behind his smile. I clicked through every link. I needed context, not gossip, not revenge, just truth. And maybe he did too. But I couldn't just message him with, "Hi, your wife is sleeping with my husband. Want to grab dinner?" So I leaned on my title, Doctor. Vivian Royce, lecturer in project leadership, respected in academic circles, frequently in charge of hosting professional guests for university seminars. I drafted the email slowly, my fingers steady. Subject: guest lecture opportunity, urban design and leadership. Dear Mr. Lang, my name is Vivian Royce, and I teach executive leadership at the Manhattan School of Leadership. We are currently hosting a speaker series focused on sustainable development and cross-disciplinary innovation. I came across your recent work at Yorktown Plaza and believe your insights would greatly benefit our graduate cohort. I'd love to connect over dinner to discuss a possible guest lecture slot this semester. I've made a reservation at Eden 51 this Friday at 7:30 p.m. should you be available. Warm regards, Vivian Royce. It was formal, direct, believable. I reread it 5 times, then hit send. I didn't pace, I didn't second guess. I simply waited. Less than 2 hours later, a reply landed. Dear Dr. Royce, thank you for reaching out. I'm flattered by the opportunity and would be delighted to meet Friday at Eden 51. The timing works perfectly. Best, Julian Lang. I read the line 3 times, delighted to meet. I closed my laptop and exhaled for what felt like the first time in 24 hours. It was happening. But there was one more step. I picked up my phone and called Eden 51. The hostess answered with that careful blend of exclusivity and charm. Good evening, Eden 51. How may I assist you? Yes, I have a reservation for this Friday evening at 7:30 p.m. Name's Royce. Would it be possible to request a table near the window, preferably close to the reservation under Maddox or Lang? We're potential collaborators. A beat of silence. Let me check. Yes, we can arrange that. You'll be at table 16, direct line of sight to table 14. Perfect. Any wine preferences? She added. Just a good view, I replied with a small smile. And chilled water. I hung up and stood in the middle of the kitchen, surrounded by stillness. The dishwasher hummed faintly. A distant siren wailed along the avenue. And yet inside me there was only one sound: readiness. I didn't feel like a scorned wife anymore. I felt like a woman reclaiming her narrative. No screaming, no sabotage, just alignment. Of truth, of timing, of tables. The last thing I did that day was walk to my closet and pull out the teal silk dress Cole once mocked. Too loud for dinner, he'd said. I ran my hand over the fabric. It wouldn't be too loud Friday night. It would be just right. Friday evening arrived with an uncanny stillness, the kind that settles just before something shifts for good. I stood before the mirror in my bedroom, adjusting the strap of the teal silk dress. It shimmered gently under the soft lamplight. Cole had once called it too loud for dinner. I used to believe him. Now I saw it for what it was: confident, unapologetic, and unforgettable. My hair was swept into a soft bun. Pearl studs in my ears. Makeup minimal but clean. A touch of plum on the lips, mascara, framing the quiet fire in my eyes. I wore champagne-colored heels I'd bought but never worn, their soles still unscuffed. The final touch: my phone set to silent. A clutch bag. A folded napkin with Julian's name printed on it from the invitation I never intended to send. Outside, the Manhattan skyline glowed gold against the dusk. I stepped into the elevator, my reflection steady in the mirrored walls, and for the first time in weeks, I felt no tremor. I wasn't going to Eden 51 to destroy anything. I was going to witness. The restaurant was exactly as I remembered from the photos, a cathedral of glass and candlelight. The ceiling curved upward like a dome of stars, the windows wrapping around the dining area in long, soft arcs. Every table was set with white linen crystal glasses and a single white orchid. The hostess greeted me with a practiced smile. Ms. Royce. Yes, I replied calmly. Your table is ready. She led me past rows of couples murmuring over wine. Each step was deliberate, each footfall a silent reminder I was no longer the woman who waited by the door. Table 16. A perfect line of sight to the corner window seat. Table 14. I sat down. The napkin was thick and pressed. The air was a blend of roasted duck truffle oil and expensive cologne. A violinist played something delicate near the center of the room, I could feel the music through the soles of my feet. I ordered a martini stirred, not shaken. My palms rested on the tablecloth, cool to the touch. At 7:26, Julian Lang arrived. Vivian Royce. I turned. He looked exactly like his photos. Tall, tailored in a charcoal suit, no tie. Clean lines, sharp jaw, tired eyes. Eyes that had likely spent too long believing in someone who'd stopped deserving it. "I'm glad you came," I said, standing to shake his hand. "Thank you for the invitation. The topic intrigued me," he said. We sat, we talked. Urban redevelopment, student feedback, green materials, all the surface things two polite professionals discuss when the air around them is holding something far heavier. And then at 7:34, Julian's eyes flicked to the entrance. They had arrived. Cole wore the gray blazer I gave him for his last promotion. His hand was gently guiding Tessa, who floated in beside him in a fitted red dress and black stilettos. Her hair was curled. Her lipstick matched the wine he had probably pre-selected. They looked like a couple in a magazine, well-lit, well-dressed, completely out of touch with the landmine they were stepping into. Cole pulled her chair. They laughed. He poured the wine with a flick of the wrist I knew too well. I could see his profile from where I sat, so at ease, so practiced. The intimacy of small touches, the shared glances, the way he leaned in, elbow on the table, lips close to her ear. I kept my breath steady, my voice even as I responded to Julian's observations. But my grip on the glass tightened with every second. Not from rage, but from a kind of mourning I hadn't prepared for. This was the man who used to read poetry to me in bed. The man who once walked 2 miles through snow just to leave me flowers on my windshield. Now he was here pouring Chateauneuf du Pape for someone who didn't know the shape of his snore. At 7:42, Cole reached for something on the table and glanced in my direction. Our eyes met. He froze. His wine glass tipped slightly. The waiter caught it just in time. Tessa followed his gaze. Her smile faltered. I watched her pupils contract. Before either of them could recover, I turned back to Julian. "Excuse me," I said, voice low. "I need to use the restroom." He nodded politely. I stood, my heels whispering against the floor as I walked past the candlelit tables. In the corridor leading to the restrooms, I paused. Tessa was standing there alone. She must have followed. Her voice was barely audible. "You're Vivian, right?" I looked at her. Her makeup was flawless. Her earrings sparkled, but her voice trembled. I nodded. "And you're the one holding hands with my husband under the table." She flinched. "Please, not here." "Why not?" I tilted my head slightly. "It's beautiful, isn't it? Candlelight, fine wine, soft music. The perfect setting for a performance." She shook her head, panicked. I raised a hand gently. "I don't need excuses. But I think someone else deserves the truth." I turned toward the main floor, spotted Julian, waiting patiently, scanning the room. He deserves to know who his wife is having dinner with. Tessa reached for me. "Please, don't." But Cole had already stepped into the hallway, having caught up. "Vivian." His voice was sharp with disbelief. "What are you doing here?" I smiled, not kindly, not cruelly, just done. I stepped past both of them and called out Julian. He stood up immediately. As he approached, I turned back to face the people I once thought I knew. "Julian," I said clearly, "this is my husband, Cole Maddox." Then I gestured toward the woman beside him. "And I believe you recognize your wife." The sound of the restaurant dimmed as if someone had turned the volume down on life itself. Tessa's hand flew to her mouth. Cole took a step back. Julian looked at his wife as if seeing her for the first time and for the last. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I simply turned and walked away, heels steady, pulse, quiet. The performance was over. The curtain had fallen, and I had been the only one in the room who never lied. I didn't walk out of Eden 51. Not yet. As I made my way back to my table, I caught the waiter's attention. He was young, polite, and visibly rattled from the tension that had just sliced through the restaurant like a wire under pressure. "Excuse me," I said quietly. "Is there a private dining room available tonight?" He hesitated. "Yes, ma'am. One is currently unreserved. I'd like it. And I'd like our table combined with Mr. Cole Maddox's. Please let him and his guests know the changes by request." He blinked. Right away. I sat down beside Julian, my face composed. I could feel his eyes on me, but he didn't ask anything yet. He didn't need to. The weight of what he'd just heard was still settling into the bones of the moment. 5 minutes later, the waiter returned. Ms. Royce, everything's arranged. Julian stood with me still quiet, but something in his jaw was shifting tense, rigid. We walked together, following the waiter through a small hallway lit with amber sconces. The private room was elegant and restrained. A long, dark wood table sat under a skylight. 4 place settings, 2 on each side. I took the seat closest to the wall. Julian sat beside me. Cole and Tessa entered moments later. She looked like she'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. The gloss on her lips had faded, her eyes red. Cole's composure was fractured. His usual stride, measured, confident, had splintered into uneven hesitation. They sat across from us like 2 students caught cheating on an exam. No one spoke for a while. There was no sound of plates or silverware, just the faint hum of the violinist still playing out in the main dining room. A beautiful tune wasted on a night like this. Cole broke the silence first. Vivian, I don't even know where to start. I tilted my head. Try 3 days ago, when your phone lit up with a dinner reservation you forgot to hide. His mouth opened, then shut again. I reached into my clutch and took out a folded piece of paper. Placed it gently on the table. Slid it forward. I printed the messages I said flatly. Just the last few weeks. I figured we wouldn't need the full year to understand the story. Julian's hand didn't move, but his eyes locked on the page. Tessa stared down, lips pressed so tightly they lost color. I saw everything. I continued. Every message, every photo, every clever little emoji about wine pairings and red dresses. Even the ones from your work trip to Montauk last fall. I particularly liked the one where she called you partner in more than one department. Julian's hand slowly moved toward the paper now. He unfolded it, read the first few lines, then stopped. His face changed, but not with rage, with quiet devastation. Tessa whispered, "I'm sorry." He didn't look at her. I turned to him instead. "Julian, he's my husband, and she's your wife. The least we deserve is the truth said to our faces." Julian finally looked up. "What are you going to tell me, Tessa?" His voice was low, clear. That it was a mistake, that it didn't mean anything because it looks like it meant quite a bit. Tessa's hands trembled. It started as a joke. We were both bored. I felt invisible at home. Cole understood me. He listened. He saw me. Julian's voice cracked. "I saw you, Tess. I worked on your home office layout for 6 weekends straight. You said you wanted a creative space. I made it from scratch. I believed in what you wanted. And you gave this back." Cole shifted forward, eyes pleading. "Vivian, I know I messed up, but this doesn't have to be the end." I looked at him, really looked at him. "No," I said slowly. "The end didn't start tonight. It started the moment you looked at her the way you used to look at me. That's when you decided our vows were just words, not a commitment." He dropped his gaze. Shame flickered across his face, the first true emotion I'd seen from him in months. I reached into my bag again and placed a hotel keycard on the table. "I'll be staying across the street tonight, room 514 at the Halcyon. You can go back to the apartment if you'd like. I won't be returning until Monday. I expect you to be gone by then." Tessa's face crumpled. Cole leaned in, panicked. "Viv, please, I can fix this. I'll go to therapy. I'll fire her. I'll leave the firm." You can't fix a house that's already collapsed at the foundation," I interrupted. "You didn't just cheat, Cole. You planned it. Over and over again. You made conscious choices, reserved tables, bought wine, held her hand, lied to my face. Every time I asked if something was wrong and you said, 'Just tired,' you chose to keep killing this marriage slowly." His hands went limp. Tessa was weeping now, hands covering her face. Julian just sat there, stone still. I turned to him gently. "I'm sorry you had to find out like this." He shook his head. "Thank you for telling me it all. I would have kept living in the dark." He looked over at Tessa again, long, hard, but empty. "I don't think I can go home with you tonight." She opened her mouth, but no sound came. I stood, smoothed my dress, adjusted my clutch. "You two will have a lot to talk about, I'm sure," I said, voice calm. "Just not in my presence." I looked at Cole one last time. "You should have thought about this moment before you ordered that wine. You don't get to cry now." Then I turned and walked out of the room. Julian followed a moment later. The doors to Eden 51 closed behind me with a soft hush. Outside, the Manhattan air had cooled the pavement slick with the early traces of night fog. I crossed the street slowly, the soft click of my heels trailing behind like punctuation marks on a letter I'd finally finished writing. The doorman at the halcyon greeted me with a quiet nod. "Good evening, Ms. Royce." "Evening," I replied, my voice a thread. Room 514 was waiting, clean, high-ceilinged, a view of Midtown, lit up like memory, sharp, glowing, distant. I closed the door behind me and slipped off my heels each step across the hardwood, releasing tension I hadn't realized I was carrying. I walked to the window. The glass was cool beneath my fingertips. The city outside pulsed on, oblivious to what had unraveled beneath its glittering skin. Cars moved. Lights blinked. Somewhere someone was laughing. But inside this room, I was alone. I sank onto the edge of the bed, clutch still in hand, and for the first time in days, maybe weeks, I let go. It wasn't the quiet kind of crying, the cinematic sort, with one single tear gliding down a cheek. No, it was raw, ugly, loud. I sobbed like a woman who'd stayed strong too long. I cried for the 10,000 little betrayals that had led to this moment, for every time I'd waited by the oven with dinner warm and his excuse colder. For every evening I sat alone, convincing myself distance was a side effect of ambition. For every photo in his phone that replaced what used to be us with her. For all the mornings he kissed my forehead and then texted someone else 5 minutes later. I cried for the version of me that still waited to be chosen. And then I cried because I'd finally chosen myself. I don't know how long I sat like that, body curled, eyes burning, heart hollowed. The knock came softly, 2 taps. Hesitant. I stood, steadied, my breath, crossed to the door. I checked the peephole. Julian. His coat collar was turned up against the cold, his hair slightly windblown. In his hand was nothing, no flowers, no explanation, just the look of a man who'd also lost something he hadn't even known he'd needed to protect. I opened the door slowly. "Sorry to bother you," he said, voice low. I didn't know where else to go. I stepped aside. "Come in." We sat in 2 armchairs by the window. I wrapped a hotel robe around me. He didn't comment on the red around my eyes. I didn't ask what he'd said to Tessa before leaving. We watched the city in silence for a while. Then he sighed. "I still don't know how you managed to sit through that dinner like you did." I let out a dry laugh. I didn't sit still. I waited. Timing matters. He nodded. Then quietly, "Thank you for not letting me keep living in a lie." "I didn't do it for revenge," I replied. "I just thought, if it were me, I'd want to know. And I was me." He looked down at his hands clasped tight. She used to say I didn't understand her anymore. Maybe she was right. Maybe I stopped asking the right questions, but I didn't stop trying. I swallowed hard. "Cole used to be my safe place," I said. "Now he's the reason I second-guess every smile." Julian turned to me. "You're allowed to grieve him, even if he doesn't deserve it." I nodded, eyes stinging again. "I think I'm going to file for divorce," I said, finally speaking the words out loud. He didn't react with surprise. Just a simple, steady, "Yeah." "Me too." We sat with that truth for a while. 2 people, strangers a week ago now, bonded by broken promises. "I'm not angry anymore," I whispered. "Not the way I thought I'd be. I'm just done." He exhaled, leaned back. "Anger doesn't last forever, but disappointment, that's quieter. It lingers." The city lights glinted across the glass like tiny fires. "I'll never again stay in a relationship that chips away at my self-respect," I said. "Not for security, not for memories, not for appearances." Julian nodded. "You're stronger than I thought." I smiled faintly. "I'm not. I'm just tired of pretending I'm okay with being invisible." We sat until the skyline blurred. Not from tears this time, but from something softer, something almost like relief. He stood after a while. "I got a separate room here, 2 floors up. Just needed to be away from the brownstone tonight." I nodded. He walked to the door, then paused. "If you ever need a friend to get through this." "I know," I said. "Thank you." He hesitated, then stepped out. I watched him disappear down the hallway, his figure retreating into quiet. And somehow I didn't feel quite so alone. I walked back to the bed, drew the curtains halfway, and turned off the lamp. The mattress dipped beneath me like an inhale. I lay down, fingers still pressed to the hotel keycard that had started this chapter. Tonight I wasn't a wife. I wasn't a victim. I wasn't someone's backup plan or second choice. I was simply Vivian. And I was finally ready to mourn what never truly loved me back. The following morning, I woke to a strange quiet, not the aching silence of an ignored marriage, but something cleaner. Emptier, yes. but honest. The sun had slipped past the skyline and now painted soft streaks across the minimalist walls of my suite at the Halcyon. I sat up slowly, body sore from the emotional aftermath, more than anything else. There were no messages from Cole, no missed calls, no attempts at explanation, just silence. I took it as a sign. By Monday, I returned to our apartment not to salvage anything but to sort and separate. I moved my essentials to a short-term sublet near Central Park, a small one-bedroom with too many windows and not enough furniture. It felt like breathing inside clean pages. There was no ceremony to the ending. I left Cole a note. I hope one day you learn the difference between getting away with something and losing someone silently. I'll let the lawyers speak from here. He never replied. Instead, over the next few weeks, I focused on things that didn't ask for permission. I went back to teaching. I rewrote parts of my lecture series on emotional intelligence and leadership. My students noticed the shift. You're more direct, one of them said. More grounded. I also signed up for a weekend photography class. I'd always wanted to, but never found time. Cole used to say, "You're already stretched thin. Don't overcommit." Now I committed to myself. And as for Julian, he didn't vanish, but he didn't crowd either. He sent a message that Tuesday. "If you want to sit in silence again sometime with coffee this time, I'm around." I smiled. Replied simply, "Silence and caffeine." Sounds perfect. Our first post-chaos meetup wasn't anything monumental. Tanner's Cafe on 72nd Street. A corner table, 2 lattes, no makeup, no pretense. He arrived on time, handed me a warm cup without asking, then said I guessed oat milk and 1 raw sugar. He was right. I laughed, really laughed for the first time in what felt like years. "Cole got my coffee order wrong for 17 years, I said, cradling the cup. "Every single time." Julian smiled, eyes tired but kind. "Then let's make this the first of many small things we get right." We didn't call it anything. We didn't define it. We were 2 people who had survived betrayal and now just existed. We messaged a few times a week, sometimes about classes, sometimes about dreams we'd left behind, sometimes about nothing at all. No pressure, no timelines, just gentle contact. One Friday evening, a month later, I invited him over to my new place. We had takeout pizza on the floor. The balcony overlooked the park, and I wrapped us both in an oversized knit blanket, while the city shimmered below. "Do you think we're changing?" I asked, chewing crust, eyes still on the skyline. He paused, then turned to me. "No," he said softly. "I think we're returning to who we really are." I didn't answer right away, but my chest tightened. Not in pain, in recognition. This quiet companionship, this safety without the need to perform, was what I hadn't even known I was missing. Not romance, not rescue, just truth. The kind you don't have to ask for because it never left. Julian didn't kiss me that night. He didn't have to. He left with the same time next week, and I nodded, smiling. No promises. No future sketched in ink. Just 2 people once cracked wide open, finding their shape again in pieces that still fit. A year slipped by the way quiet seasons change, without drama, without announcement. Just one morning, I looked outside and realized spring had returned. The invitation came in a cream envelope, hand-addressed. Professor Martha Benson's retirement gala. The woman who once taught me everything I knew about emotional clarity and negotiation. Who said don't fight to be understood. Live in a way that makes clarity inevitable. I couldn't miss it. The event was held at Hotel Leray, an old Manhattan gem filled with marble staircases and golden sconces. I arrived early, wearing a navy silk dress and my mother's pearl earrings. In my clutch was a gift-wrapped first edition of The Courage to be Disliked, her favorite book. I expected nothing more than a quiet evening of speeches and champagne, but fate has a way of circling back. I saw him near the wine table. Cole Maddox. His presence hit me like the soft echo of an old song, familiar, distant, no longer sharp. His temples had grayed. The posture was still straight, but the weight on his shoulders was visible now. A man who once moved like he owned every room, now stood as though he were waiting for permission to breathe. He turned. We locked eyes. He walked over with a glass of red in hand, pausing just close enough. "Vivian," he said, voice rougher than I remembered. "I didn't think you'd come." "I didn't think I'd see you here either," I replied. My tone wasn't cold, just neutral. He gave a faint smile. "Professor Benson is the last one from the firm who still speaks to me." I nodded. She always saw the best in people. Cole looked at me for a long time, not with longing, not with entitlement, but with something smaller, sadder. Finally, he sighed. I owe you an apology, a real one, not for closure. Not because you asked for it, but because I need to say it. I said nothing, let the air hold space for him. After that night, he continued, I lost more than I expected. Not just the job, or the firm, or the title. I lost myself. For a while, I tried to make it work with her, but it never felt real again. Not after what you did. I raised an eyebrow, amused. You mean the dinner, I mean the mirror you held up, he said quietly. I finally saw myself, and I didn't like what was staring back. I looked at him now, not with pity, but with perspective. I hope you find peace, I said simply. He nodded slowly. And are you okay? Yes, I said without hesitation. I'm rebuilding life on my own terms, and I'm not alone. And just as if the universe had cued the moment perfectly, Julian walked in. Tailored blazer, slate gray shirt, eyes that still held patience. He spotted me, smiled across the room. Cole followed my gaze. His shoulders dropped, not in defeat but in acceptance. He's a good man, he said. You deserve a fresh start. I nodded. So do you. If you're ready not to hurt anyone else. He smiled, smaller this time, and stepped back as if physically giving me room to move forward. Later that evening, Julian and I sat side by side during the toast. We chatted with former colleagues, posed for photos, shared a slow dance beneath the chandeliers. No grand declarations, no tension, just presence, just truth. As the night ended, we walked through the lobby hand in hand. I said, watching the lights shimmer across the tile floor. There was a time I thought betrayal was the end of the road. Julian gave my hand a gentle squeeze, and now I looked up at him. Now I think it was just a pause, the breath before the next chapter. He didn't say anything, he didn't need to. His hand in mine was already writing it with me. There's a moment, usually quiet, often overlooked, when you realize you've come full circle. For me, it wasn't dramatic. It wasn't set in a grand room or beneath candlelight. It happened on a regular Tuesday morning. I was walking home from the market, a paper bag cradled in my arms, sunlight warming the back of my neck. My apartment door creaked just a little, like always. Oliver, my dog, greeted me with a tail thump and sleepy eyes. There was music playing softly on my Bluetooth speaker, Billie Holiday, I think. I set the bag down and stood in my tiny, sun-drenched kitchen. And it hit me. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for a text. Not for an apology. Not for someone to make me feel like I mattered. I already did. It took everything that broke to get me here. 17 years of believing marriage meant survival, even if it cost my identity. Years of folding myself into corners to keep peace. Months of thinking that if I just tried harder, dressed better, stayed quieter, he would choose me again. But love, real love, doesn't make you beg for a seat at your own table. It doesn't ask you to shrink. And it never puts someone else in your place while looking you in the eye and calling it stress. The night at Eden 51 wasn't just about catching Cole and Tessa. It was about catching myself before I slipped further into forgetting who I was. I didn't scream. I didn't shatter glass. I let the silence speak. And in that stillness, I heard the truth louder than I ever had before. He had stopped choosing me long before I found that dinner reservation. But I had the power to choose again. I chose not to compete with someone who betrayed without guilt. I chose not to protect a man who prioritized convenience over commitment. I chose not to explain my pain to someone who treated it like a nuisance. Instead, I chose peace. And it began with leaving, not loudly, but completely. And no, I didn't heal overnight. Healing didn't come in the form of a new romance, though Julian was a kind soul. It came in the quiet, in learning to grocery shop for one, and not feel lonely. In choosing my own coffee in the mornings, and remembering it's okay to enjoy things alone. In waking up without a weight on my chest, wondering what lie I'd have to swallow that day. It came in rebuilding not just routines, but boundaries. I stopped explaining myself, stopped apologizing for needing respect, stopped sacrificing clarity for the illusion of stability, and what I gained, freedom. Not the flashy kind, the deep kind. The kind that lets you sit across from your past, smile politely, and not ache anymore. Cole still exists. His name still comes up in old friend circles, but he's no longer the center of the story. I am, and if you've made it to this point in my story, Maybe you're standing on the edge of your own. Maybe you're staring down a truth you don't want to face. Maybe you're still choosing silence because screaming feels too final. Let me tell you something. I wish someone told me you are not hard to love. You are just asking love from someone who was too small to hold it. You don't need closure. You don't need revenge. You need you whole, honest, and unwilling to bleed for anyone who wouldn't do the same for you. If betrayal was the chapter that broke you, let dignity be the one that rebuilds you. Because healing is not a finish line. It's a decision over and over again to never betray yourself just to keep someone else comfortable. What did you think of this story? Have you ever walked away from someone not because you stopped loving them, but because you started loving yourself more? Let me know in the comments. If you would have done what Vivian did, vote number 9. If you think she should have forgiven, vote for 4. And if you want more stories like this, raw, real, and redemptive, make sure to follow True Tales. Because here we don't just survive heartbreak, we rise from it.